Not quite the right day to release this, all things considered, but necromancy is my favorite school of magic without a doubt. Contrary to what you might think, it doesn't have to be evil. I mean, at least in 5e D&D, resurrection is a necromancy spell, and I'm sure at least a few of you have had your characters saved because the cleric was technically a practitioner of the necromantic arts. It's a varied school of magic about a grim subject, true, but not necessarily an evil one. But in Warhammer, throw that hippie crap straight in the garbage. Get rid of that like Andy got rid of Woody in that one Toy Story scene. No one likes necromancy because it can be for the good of the realm or anything. People like necromancy because summoning legions of the dead to attack your enemies is awesome. You've got zombie apocalypses as a mechanic, and that's oftentimes the weakest part of a necromancer's kit. The Walking Dead is considered basic tier necromancy, fellas, although in fairness that show fell off hard, so maybe that's fair. In Warhammer, necromancy is, I'd argue, the coolest it's ever been. It's one of the fiercest magical arts around, able to produce armies that outnumber the living as well as spells that sap the soul out of everyone around. And I guess it's around in 40k too. Though Halloween has ended, the frights never have to stop, so let's take a look at Warhammer's interpretation of the fine art of raising the dead back to life to make them kill your enemies. As a bonus, you can raise those same enemies back to fight for you too. But before I start yapping about lore, tell me, do you eat food? If so, I have just the thing for you. Factor, the sponsor of this video. Factor makes chef-crafted and dietitian-approved meals that are shipped right to your front door. With over 80 meals rotating weekly, twice as many seafood options as before, and so much more options to choose from than they already had, you'll be guaranteed to find something that suits your taste. And aside from being healthy with options for anything from high protein to calorie-smart meals, they're also just dang tasty. The experts have vouched for Factor's ability to make sure you're eating healthy, and I personally can vouch for them being good as I devour each meal they send me in about 2 minutes. Speaking of, 2 minutes is all it's gonna take to get these bad boys ready to enjoy. Pop it into the microwave, heat one up for 2 minutes, and you're good to enjoy a nice meal. If you're anything like me and you only realize it's 12 at the last minute, and no, I usually can't tell the difference between 12 AM or PM, Factor is a godsend. I assure you that just because I'm diabetic doesn't mean I don't need to eat, and Factor is great for when I realize 12 hours into the day that I should probably get on that. And if you too would like to get some Factor, then look no further. Head to Factor75.com or click the link below and use code PancreasFB50 to get 50% off your first Factor box plus free breakfast for 1 year. That's code PancreasFB50 at Factor75.com to get 50% off plus free breakfast for 1 year. Offer only valid for new Factor customers with code and qualifying auto-renewing subscription purchase. If you need yourself a quick bite to eat, then Factor is the best choice around, so make sure to get yourself some today. Now then, I really wish we'd get more news on State of Decay 3, and also Warhammer lore, I guess. In the selfish interest of ensuring viewer retention rate stays high, let's talk about necromancy and the grim darkness of the far future first. Let's go even further and get the absolute most technical form of necromancy out of the way first. Necrons, if you squint hard enough, do reanimate from death, technically. All Necrons are made out of living metal, which combined with how most of them are personality-less drones, does make fighting them in some ways feel like fighting zombies. If you don't put them down for good with overkill, they're gonna keep coming. Now, granted, zombies tend to not fire back at you with green lightning that atomizes you. That tends to be exclusive to 40k. Although if a flood form picks up the right weapon, I suppose Halo can have that sort of thing too. And getting closer to actual necromancy here, their reanimation protocols do kick in to more effectively bring a Necron back from death. If you blow up one so hard that they can't repair on the spot, they get phased out. Their body and personality engrams, or whatever they call their minds nowadays, get transported back to either their tomb world and home complex or a nearby ship. It'll then hold on to their robo-mind and or body until either repairs or replacement can be made. The scariest part is that this looks basically identical to them blowing up, so you can never be quite sure if you've truly defeated a Necron. Now, it should be noted that the process isn't completely perfect, and every time a small little bit of the mind is lost, so if a Necron reanimates enough times, they might become no more than a husk like the common Necron warrior. But Necron tech is good enough that I'm sure this has to happen hundreds if not thousands of times to have any meaningful effect. For that matter, Trazen's most common hobby besides collecting things is getting himself killed and then coming back. His deal is a little bit unique compared to others, but he's died often enough in some capacity that I'm sure if it was going to happen after just a few deaths, he wouldn't be nearly as much of a lovable kleptomaniac as he is. That kind of necromancy is pushing it a bit though. Necrons don't have souls, so you can argue it's just like transferring a computer file around. What is actual necromancy is whatever the hell was going on Mortarian's homeworld. When he landed on Barbarous because the Chaos Gods / Argel Tals / his mom / whatever retcon GW decides to go with next threw him into the warp, he was found by the overlords of the planet. They lived high in the mountains in the most poisonous areas of the planet, were aliens who ruled over human slaves, and they practiced necromancy. There, in truth, is not all that much to say about it, it's just a Primarch backstory thing. They could use Warcraft to raise the dead back to life. But it is still necromancy, and by virtue of it being Mortarian's backstory, this does tie into something else that is actually quite common in 40k. Nurgle necromancy. Nurgle in 40k is no Nagash, to be clear, but he does from time to time take an interest in bringing the dead back to life in a fashion. In some ways, his plagues can just bring people back, and in many ways, they are being brought back from the dead like this. Their minds intact for a meaning of the word, and their souls bound to Nurgle, they return to life to spread life. Plague-ridden life, of course, this is Nurgle. And through warp sorcery and Nurgle's love, this can be done with surprisingly minimal difficulty, at least beyond what any chaos ritual requires. There's a fellow named Necrosius the Undying who makes this part of his gimmick. He loves to spread plagues that cause zombies to rise and attack Nurgle's foes. Beyond that, there's a few more ways Nurgle has made zombies in 40k, such as the plague/curse of unbelief. In the build-up to the 13th Black Crusade, Mortarion made a zombie plague. There's not much more that needs to be said here, other than they did it with a fancy cursed hand Abaddon once used in an earlier Black Crusade. He gave it to Typhus and made him the disease's herald, and he spread it across Imperial worlds to cause plague zombies to rise up across the galaxy. Then the 13th Black Crusade happened, and this wasn't much touched on afterwards. I presume this lore exists because zombies were everywhere in the 2010s, and GW wanted to get in on it for their cash cow. Caiaphas Cain in one of his stories fought what I believe was these zombies, and if I remember correctly, he solved it by having an Imperial priest bless artillery shells that had been filled with holy water that then rained across the city. Emperor blessed that commissar, showing us further proof that The Walking Dead really is an overrated piece of shit that died when it resorted to driving a tank through the prison because it forgot how to be interesting. There was also another variant called the Doubtworm he made that instead of turning you into shamblers, it turned people into the Rage Virus zombies from 28 days later. Only these ones could pretend to not be zombies for a bit until they turned into a big worm. If you're faithful enough in the Emperor, the Doubtworm doesn't get you. Otherwise, it does get you. It's cool, and fast zombies are always terrifying, but that's largely it. There's also Poxwalkers, which are especially terrifying. Your body falls to Nurgle's influence and his viruses, but your mind doesn't. So you're trapped in your own flesh, watching as your body attacks everyone around you in the name of the Plague Father, which is just awful. It's a miserable experience, and one of the more interesting twists on zombies, where the closest equivalents I can think of are the Witch from Left 4 Dead and Warm Bodies of all things. And it's also proof that Nurgle is not a good god. You don't want Nurgle's love. Weaponizing locked-in syndrome is one of the most monstrous things I can think of. It's genuinely just terrifying. It can also affect dogs, as you see in Darktide, and mutate to create things like the Poxburster, also from Darktide, which is a boomer from Left 4 Dead that can't puke but can instead augment its explosive bile with melt-a-bombs. The Imperium isn't immune to dabbling in necromancy either. I would like to present an argument that the Golden Throne keeping the Emperor alive is arguably a sort of necromancy. Very arguably, and this isn't a hill I'm necessarily going to die on, but hear me out. Necromancy, regardless of whether it's portrayed as good or bad, is an unnatural thing. It's interfering with the cycle of life and death, and as much as it can hurt, everyone dies in the end. It's also naturally related to souls, since aside from the oddball spells like some D&D ones, necromancy is all about resurrecting the dead back to life, which at least ideally can bring the soul back to the body. The Emperor should have died, but on account of the throne and the several thousands of psychers fed to him every week, he doesn't pass on. Technically, it might not be necromancy, but whatever is going on with him is at least a cousin of the art. Life support is hooking someone up to IVs and monitoring their pulse and whatnot. Feeding someone 1,000 wizards a day is a bit beyond what I'd call standard medical practice. That said, there are a number of Inquisitors looking into what is flat-out necromancy, specifically to bring back Big E. The two most prominent are the philosophical schools of Cassophilianism and Revivificationism. Cassophilians try and study the warp to see how to properly bring back a soul from it, with the natural endpoint being to drag Big E's soul out of the warp and let him kick ass again. Naturally, this runs the extreme risk of chaos getting involved, then at best you might just create a perpetual, but how valid a method it is to bring back Big E isn't the point here. It's bringing a soul back from the warp, so it's necromancy. Revivers, as I will not be saying their proper name ever again, meanwhile meanwhile, are more focused on studying the exact moment of death, watching the heart stop beating, and since it's Warhammer, the exact moment the soul leaves the body, presumably with psyker help on standby since normal people can't track that sort of thing. Still undoubtedly risky, though given some Dark Eldar stuff we'll talk about later, I'd wager that this is a safer option than what the Cassos are doing. There's also some technological methods aside from the Necrons, most prominent being the Proteus protocol. Indeed, that is the one from TTS. It brings you back mind, body, and spirit as well. It also brings you back corrupted and wrong, because this is 40k. As expected, those downsides stop almost no one who knows of it from wanting to use it, because vague ideas of alien thoughts and degenerate hungers don't mean a whole lot compared to living forever, now do they? Oh no, I'm gonna start craving food other people find gross. I live in a family of people who despise fish while I love it. Being told I like to eat weird things isn't gonna stop me from getting immortality. Plus, come on now, the warnings are far too general for anyone of sufficient knowledge to take them seriously. Everything in 40k comes with vague warnings of doom and the destruction of your soul. At a certain point, it just turns into white noise. Did that one need to be a whole transition and segment all to itself? No, but it makes the Eldar seem more important, so I made it one. The Eldar are only surpassed by Nurgle, actually, in terms of who most often uses necromancy in the setting. Magical necromancy, anyways. We can ignore random Necron Warrior 9001 getting phased back home to be repaired. The simplest and most honest form of necromancy is actually Dark Eldar technology. The Dark Eldar have these folks they call homunculi. Not quite as interesting as the Full Metal Alchemist ones, they make up for it by turning the horror to 100. In day-to-day life, the homunculi are all the worst kind of mad scientists. When the Dark Eldar do that thing everyone mentions about them and turn you into furniture, these are the guys that do it. It's equal part art and science to them, you see, because what is the point of all this talent they have if you can't enjoy the finer things in life every now and again? Drukhari being what they are, the finer things in life are always horrific. No one truly knows where they come from, because they don't at all resemble the beings they once were, and they're all incredibly old. Hints and guesses indicate that they may be remnants of pre-fall of the Eldar scientists, doctors, and artists, which at that point in Eldar history, it's completely reasonable to assume that all those things were the same profession. At least one, Urian Rakarth, does predate the birth of Slaanesh, so whether or not any others do as well, the concept of them has some roots in the old Eldar Empire. Similar to the Emperor, an argument could be made that they practiced necromancy with half of their projects. Usually when you mold someone into the shape of a ceiling lamp, they die, but not in Kamara, so you could potentially argue that is necromancy. What factually is necromancy is them bringing back dead Dark Eldar. The homunculi have facilities that can bring back any Dark Eldar essentially flawlessly. If a Kabalite dies on a raid, they can come back no problem. With two caveats though, and one of those is partially a lie the homunculi say. A Dark Eldar must give a little bit of flesh to a homunculi in order for them to have a basis to resurrect them from. It can in theory be just a sliver of skin, but this is Dark Eldar territory here. They're asking for at least a finger or a toe. Come on now. The second is that if the subject is dead for more than a day, they're said to be beyond recovery. They're said to be because that's absolutely not true, but if you wait longer than that, you risk demons coming out alongside the resurrected subject, as well as potentially even a disjunction in Kamara where the warp intersects with it. This makes the homunculi one of the only people in Kamara allowed to practice what amounts to warpcraft without being butchered for it, and it's about the only thing they're going to be careful with. Sewing someone back together is an arts and crafts project in terms of both how hard it is for them and how much fun they'll be having doing it, but anything with a non-zero chance of summoning Slaanesh demons is to be treated with caution. The process does also require pain to function and probably drains your soul just a little bit, but I mean, just fucking look at the Dark Eldar. That's not a con here. Yeah, if they keep dying, they need more pain for the process to work again, but that's pain they inflict on the lesser races. Who cares? Every Dark Eldar can be immortal as long as they find people to torture. Losing some of their soul is not an issue for them. They can just top it off later. Urian Rakarth himself has died so often that every time he comes back, he gets a new vestigial limb or other useless hanger-on, and it doesn't stop him. He seeks out new deaths to see what it's like. The flaws in the Dark Eldar necromantic process are only flaws if you have a moral compass, of which maybe like 1 in a million Drukhari tops possess something resembling one. If you also don't have a moral compass and can somehow grab their technology, and it is at the end of the day technology instead of outright sorcery, hook a bunch of people up in jigsaw traps and enjoy your near consequence-free resurrections for the rest of time. If the Dark Eldar can get away with it despite Slaanesh having her hooks on their souls, I'm sure a human could do it safely as well. This method of bringing the dead back to life is so reliable that a homunculus was invited to not only Terra, but the Golden Throne itself to see if he could find a way to save the Emperor. He didn't, and he only came because he wanted to marvel at how much agony the Emperor was in on the Golden Throne, but the fact he was brought there at all shows just how perfectly these Dark Eldar can play with life and death. The more interesting way is the Craft Worlds, however. As you may know, if a Craft World Eldar dies, they get jammed into their Soul Rock and shoved into the Infinity Circuit at the heart of their Craft World. It's like Purgatory in there. Not really much to do, but it's a tranquil place where their souls can rest. Certainly it's a lot better than what most other people will get, let alone the Eldar themselves would get without it. This galaxy being what it is in this setting, though, sometimes you don't have enough Eldar left to properly defend the Craft World. Sometimes you have to go to the Infinity Circuit, grab Grandpa, put him back in a Soul Stone, and jam him in a mech suit. No one likes doing this, not even Spirit Seers themselves. Part of their job is to help with the Infinity Circuit, maintaining it and keeping the dead safe, and no one wants to drag dead relatives and friends out of their peaceful afterlife to potentially have their Spirit Stones shattered and their souls lost to Slaanesh. But as time goes on, the threats against the Eldar grow more numerous, it's become increasingly common for the various Wraith units of the Eldar to be seen on the battlefield. The attitudes towards this are all negative, but vary from craft world to craft world. On most of them, it's the absolute most last-ditch effort possible, where the Farseers must be consulted and the runes read before anyone even thinks about letting the dead walk around in Wraithbone suits. No one likes a grave robber, especially one that specializes in digging up souls. On Iyanden, however, it's just life. Even by Eldar standards, they have almost no one left, and entire courts on the craft world are made up of the technically living dead to guide who remains on policy and whatnot. None of the Eldar on Iyanden are happy about doing this, but to keep who's left alive, they have to do it. And it should be noted that them not wanting to do it is the kind of thing that really stands out in 40k, because it's morality keeping the Eldar from going into the Infinity Circuits, emptying them, and throwing near endless hordes of Wraithguard at their enemies. As far as performing the procedure goes, it's not the most difficult thing in the world to put an Eldar back in a Soul Stone. It's not easy, but it's common enough that the job that does it is a generic character model for the faction, not some super special named dude. The Eldar don't deploy Wraithguard unless they must because it is honest-to-God morality in the setting of Warhammer 40k keeping them from doing so. And I think that's sweet. No one wants to see Grandpa die. They want to see Grandpa die 1,000 times more, even less. Both of these necromantic forms are born out of some kind of necessity. The Dark Eldar, while easily being the most secure at any given moment as a faction, are in a society where backstabbing is an expected way to greet someone. Death is around every corner for them, and that's not even discussing real space raids where they can potentially be subject to all the dangers of the galaxy. A way to make sure they can come back after death is a pretty handy thing to have. As for the Craftworld Eldar, they're simply screwed beyond all others without this necromancy. They're not monsters, so they don't torture people to stay alive, and every battle they don't lose anyone to combat is a battle they're coming away from worse than the other guy did. Wraithguard are one of the only ways to ensure they can remain a potent force to fight, and while the extent of that varies from Craftworld to Craftworld, sometimes there simply is no choice but to break out the ghost mechs. Also, I'm not counting Iniad as necromancy because it's kinda weird. There is some necromantic shenanigans going on with him, but there's a vibe I feel like with necromancy that I don't think Iniad quite delivers on. Then I'd have to discuss the Inari, and no one likes when someone does that. So now, let's move on to the main course of this video, shall we? Now we're back in town for classical necromancy. No technology, no chaos stuff, just good old-fashioned black magic, baby. And since you're legally required to say this when you talk about the subject, such is the power of Nagash. Necromancy is an accusation often thrown against amethyst wizards, which is admittedly understandable given they use what's known as the Wind of Death. They can in fact speak with the dead, which if you don't mind stretching things, does probably qualify as necromancy, but that's more in the D&D way of necromancy, where you have a spell that causes necrotic damage, so it's a necromancy school spell. Doesn't quite fit, you know? Although necromancy in Warhammer Fantasy does have plenty of damaging spells, so maybe I'm overthinking it. Either way, an amethyst wizard would at best punch you in the throat, and at worst age you to dust for calling them that. They detest necromancy and will do whatever they can to see it erased. Actual necromancy begins in Nehekara, everyone's favorite totally not Egypt. The winds of magic has always blown into the Warhammer world, you see, and death magic has always been a part of that. Necromancy, however, has not, because necromancy is not a wind of magic. It's not even something like dark magic, where it blows in before splitting into those winds of magic. Necromancy as a school of magic is an artificial one in Warhammer Fantasy, drawing from the winds and dark magic to become something all its own. Enter everyone's favorite skeleton pope, Nagash. As you probably know, Nagash sucks, but he's a clever bastard without question. When he was in charge of preparing some Dark Elf sacrifices, he was already a member of the Mortuary cult, and so knew a decent amount of magic going in. Learning from the Dark Elves' secrets of dark magic, he not only became the greatest and potentially only, at least at this point in time, human user of dark magic, but realized the limits of his human nature. Humanity couldn't handle the full extent of dark magic. It was too wild and uncontrollable for mere men. But of course, he wasn't going to just settle for what he had learned. He was not the first human being to attempt necromancy, and if we split hairs, he wasn't even the very first one to succeed in it. But the level of his success was completely unmatched, as were the possibilities opened by it and the ease by which it could be performed thanks to his efforts. Nagash combined the techniques of the Mortuary cult, which were already able to keep the Lich Priest alive forever, albeit without halting aging, with his knowledge of death magic and dark magic to form a never-before-seen kind of magic, true necromancy. With it, he would go on to do all the things he did, but the chief of which, in terms of this, was to teach select followers some of his knowledge which allowed it to spread, create the 9 books of Nagash, which spread it further and acted as artifacts in their own right, and create the Elixir of Life. That elixir would go on to be not quite correctly copied by Neferata, as well as others, to create vampires, yet another form of undead that plagued the Warhammer world. While Nagash isn't technically the first person to practice some kind of necromancy, if you see a necromancer pop up in a fantasy story, they're using magic rooted in his discoveries. When Nagash did this, he didn't just create a new type of magic, though. He created a type of magic that is fundamentally different from anything else, be it the material world or chaos. As magic, and quite evil magic at that, it's highly corruptive to humans. Necromancers don't all just so happen to look like hideous old wrinkly ballsacks. They physically start to wither and decompose as the magic of undeath takes a toll on them. It drives people mad, and let's not pretend that raising entire graveyards to serve you is a natural thing. But on the other hand, necromancy is fairly ordered as far as magic goes. An inherent part of a large amount of its spells is making the dead bound to you via magic, and you can see, for example, in the Total War games that skeletons animated by necromancy walk in perfect coordination with each other. This makes necromancers, be they mortal or vampire, actually incredibly resistant to chaos corruption. It can happen. A group of blood dragons in the end times was corrupted by Khorne, for example, and in Age of Sigmar, the Osiarch Bone Reaper's stronghold in the 8 points is slowly being corrupted and requires replacement parts regularly. But look at those two circumstances closer. With the Osiarch, they are pretty much sitting inside the realm of chaos. Of course they're going to get corrupted eventually. It's kind of like how doctors always leave the room for x-rays. A couple of x-rays aren't going to kill you, especially with protection. Constant exposure to X-rays, or indeed constant exposure to raw, unfiltered warp stuff, is a different story. As for the blood dragons, the blood-sucking vampires that are all about fighting started serving the god of blood and war. I think that being corrupted might be a strong way to put what happened to them. There's a reason why everyone fears necromantic magic, from the Empire to the Skaven to even the Chaos Gods themselves. Necromancy is magic, but ordered. It's also material, but fundamentally unnatural and wrong. It's a terrifying force that has no equivalent, and while it can be beaten, much like zombies, it takes a whole lot to put it down. Even if you do so, don't be surprised if the guy you killed comes back a few years later for round 2. It's also worth mentioning that as an inherently evil magic, massive amounts of human sacrifices are either required or at least will help the caster perform the spell, depending on the level of spell in question. This is in fact part of how Nagash was able to create necromancy, as when he was experimenting early on, the souls of his sacrifices were great fuel for his spells. Turns out killing someone makes undead magic stronger, who would have thought? Attitudes towards necromancers and the undead in general are just about universally negative, but the specifics vary. Nagash is obviously hated by all with a passion, but he's hardly the only necromancer, even if he is the father of the art. For the Lizardmen, they're largely just another problem. They're more low-variant fractals that cause problems, and the Lizardmen deal with them on sight, or specifically seek them out if it's particularly important for something. You won't see much undeath on Lustria either way, though the exception to this is Luthor Harkon and his vampire Coast, who have made themselves such a pain in the ass for the Lizardmen that they'd happily see it reduced to ash. For Chaos, it's something to be feared as a whole, to be sure, but no self-respecting Chaos Lord will fear anything undead short of someone like Vlad von Karstein charging them. The dwarves hate it because raising their honored dead is abominable, especially by their standards, and of course, since necromancy is magic, that means necromancy equals elf nonsense and therefore bad. In the Empire of Man, meanwhile, calling someone a necromancer necromancer, and especially a von Karstein, is about the same as calling someone that one German leader YouTube doesn't like you saying the name of. With vampires and the undead being such a problem that they regularly cause empire-wide wars, and Sylvania being a complete pigsty of the undead, the Empire would on most days probably see all vampires destroyed before chaos. Common undead can be of any race. A vampire or necromancer can resurrect bodies of anything nearby, because undead in Warhammer most of the time are puppeted corpses controlled by magic. Dwarf, elf, human, ogre, whatever's nearby will work just fine. Vampires too can be almost any race. For a variety of reasons specific to each faction, there's far less non-human vampires than human vampires, but they can exist. Wherever death magic blows, necromancers can be found as well, attempting to use it as part of their corrupted magics. Pure death magic is no issue, of course, but when necromancers use their art to corrupt an area, it can affect the land itself and, of course, the flow of magic. Everything becomes sickly and dying, if not outright dead. Spirits will become drawn to the land, and presumably hostile ones to the living at that. If you soak an area in enough necromantic energy, the dead will just start to rise on their own. This is a common problem of Stirland peasants, with hordes rising from Sylvania sometimes wandering over to start eating them. They deserve it for being Stirlanders, but it's something to be wary of for anyone unlucky enough for having to travel through Stirland. As for how it affects people, oftentimes it won't quite kill them, but it'll sap their minds and personalities, turning them into almost zombies. They lose hope, move sluggishly, and become easy to dominate by lords of the undead. Necromancy, as perhaps the most varied school of magic in all of Warhammer, has a wide variety of different spells to throw at your opponent. Seriously, just go to the fantasy wiki. I know, the wiki's usually a bad idea for all but newcomers, but for something like listing spells, I think it's fine. There's spells to hurt people, spells of course to raise the dead, spells to sap the energy out of people, which doesn't actually hurt them, but does make them easier to hurt, spells that fill people with fear, spells that summon bats because vampire stuff. You can do a whole lot with necromancy, especially if you throw away your morals and start sacrificing people for more oomph. Vampires come into being with some level of necromantic knowledge inherent to them. Since their creation was a result of someone copying Nagash's notes, this makes decent sense. While some bloodlines such as the Necrarchs are experts at magic, all can become proficient with it, with Manfred being one of the greatest vampire wizards around, and he's a von Karstein. Just about every vampire you come across will have the ability to raise the dead, but beyond that, their level of necromantic knowledge varies heavily from individual to individual. Naturally, those of a more magical bent will be weaker physically, but as a vampiric aside, any vampire can rip apart a man in full armor with their bare hands. I assure you, you will not be beating them in melee, even if they're the necromancy version of a nerd. Necromancers themselves, however, are an interesting sort on their own. Nagash set the bar rather high with his antics because he is a god. By the end times I feel comfortable calling him a god, and by Age of Sigmar he's outright the god of death, having eaten almost all the others. Necromancers besides him are quite a bit weaker meanwhile, which while in-universe I don't have too much for, out-of-universe there's some interesting history behind it. In old Warhammer fantasy, necromancy was not only common amongst races, but some such as the Dark Elves of all people were required to take at least some amount of necromancy spells. Even the High Elves and Orcs had the option to take necromancy, which is insane nowadays. Until 3rd edition fantasy, if you wanted to run undead, you needed a necromancer to be your army's general. But the vampires became more prominent, and in 5th edition, necromancers weren't general options anymore. This was done away with in 6th edition, and necromancers could once again be army generals. And of course, Heinrich Kemmler was a necromancer who retained some amount of respect, perhaps because he's Warhammer's first ever special character, if not just for him being a necromancer. But as time went on and fantasy marched forward, the proud occupation of man who digs up corpses to use as minions was looked down upon, it seems, by GW. Vampires were the heads of the undead, the non-Egyptian ones anyways, and necromancers lost a lot of prominence. I mean, just look at them in Total Warhammer 3. They're worthless as generals. A necromancer hero is a good addition to your undead army, but a necromancer lord is a waste of time and money. Following this theme, we can actually look at Heinrich Kemmler himself. He was once billed as being almost as powerful as Nagash and created an entire spell lore that was essentially the necromancy lore but better. But as time went on and GW changed priorities and whatnot, all those who aren't Nagash became infinitely weaker. Kemmler's final fate was to become the first named casualty of the end times, destroyed by Arkan as he realized just how powerful he wasn't. Necromancers are typically instead insane madmen consumed with both a lust for power and a fear of death, delving into dark arts to prevent something they're almost certainly not intelligent nor powerful enough to stave off. They make for fun villains to be sure, and at Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay's power level they can be cool big bads for your campaign, but in larger Warhammer storylines, necromancers are almost always going to be serving someone else. Aside from that bit of real-life history though, there are a few additional necromantic methods in fantasy unrelated to Nagash's ilk. The least fleshed out is whoever the hell built a bunch of barrows across the Empire. Whatever culture created them did something so that if you bothered them, their honored dead popped back into their bodies like Draugr from Skyrim. They aren't terribly interesting, truth be told, but could be a fun little thing to throw into a fantasy roleplay campaign. Have your players investigate a tomb, think it's vampire activity, and then a particularly educated witch hunter executes them for wasting their time. The other major necromancy is Nehekar and mortuary rituals. This is of course only used by the Tomb Kings, who are the only remaining practitioners of this and are neither alive nor willing to share their secrets. This is related to Nagash, but more so because of the effects of his assholery. When he cast his spell that killed everything in Nehekara, it permanently altered the land and never again held life. It became the most stereotypical desert you can think of, full of bull skulls, people skulls, and sand. However, it did have the accidental side effect of allowing Lich Priests to get use out of their rituals once more. When they lived, these were rituals to preserve the dead, to keep Lich Priests alive forever and help the deceased pass into the afterlife. When Nagash did one of his earlier funnies and killed his brother's wife, he ruined the connection Nehekara had with its gods, and these rituals became basically useless. But after he killed everything, his magic was able to be filtered through mortuary rituals to bring the dead back to life in a more gentle way. Nehekaran undead can be reanimated through these rituals without corrupt magic. It's largely because of this, at least in my estimation, that the Tomb Kings aren't inherently evil unlike almost any other undead in Warhammer. Barring the occasional nice vampire, every other undead is malicious, but the Tomb Kings aren't. Inherently evil, anyways. Some of them are pricks. Assuming they haven't gone insane, they're the same as they were in life, just with no skin or organs. Tomb King necromancy isn't evil, and has a lot of rituals and knowledge going into it to assure this. They take the souls of their dead from their realm of souls, give them life, and send them to kill the living. But in a morally neutral way. Also, because I don't know where else I'd mention this, there was once a Tomb King who caught a pair of grave robbers. Speaking through his priest, who spoke Reichspiel, he asked them why they invaded his tomb, whereupon one of them said he wasn't there for the king's treasure, but rather a cure to a poison slowly killing his wife. The Tomb King executed his companion, who was a thief, and as translated by his lich priest, he informed the man that he too once knew love and would have done anything to save his wife as well, and gave him the knowledge of how to make that cure. Not only is that incredibly cute, but proof that Tomb King necromancy, unlike the rest, isn't inherently evil. There is also, for a quick mention, the most technical form of necromancy yet conceived. In Thanquol's books, Clan Scryer technology resurrects the first Bone Ripper Thanquol ever received, except that really didn't, just moved his body parts around like the world's most expensive warpstone-fueled puppet. In Age of Sigmar, necromancy is largely still the same. A bit less emphasis on how corruptive it is, and you can occasionally find necromancers in Order cities that aren't being beaten to death by mobs, but it's still at the very least an uncouth thing to do. It will still usually get you killed for practicing it, but sometimes that doesn't happen. Necromancers do have much more to fear, however, as Nagash only barely tolerates their existence in Age of Sigmar. He sees it as mortals stepping in on his turf, and he's a lot more mobile nowadays, so if you practice necromancy in front of him, he's probably going to kill you and raise you as his slave. During the Necroquake era of the game, it inundated just about everywhere, and you couldn't go more than 50 feet without finding either a zombie horde, a swarm of ghosts, or a necromancer commanding some such thing. Godric actually travels with one for a bit in one of his early AOS novels, and then he turns out to be an asshole and gets killed. Shocker. I will say I was briefly entertaining the idea of doing a Necromancer mini do or don't here, but between their rules and the fact that anything I could say for lore up and downsize is incredibly obvious, I won't bother. As of AOS 4th edition, they're wizards, they can cast and unbind a single spell, they can make nearby undead fight a second time, and they get a ward save if they're nearby certain undead units that's actually just giving the wound to that unit instead of the necromancer themselves. You should probably have at least one in your army, and they're a hero unit in an undead Warhammer faction, so you can safely assume your opponent is going to be gunning for them almost immediately. And those are the Necromancers of Warhammer, from 40k to fantasy. You should play a necromancer in all your games, tabletop or video. It's fun. Outnumbering almost everyone else by default is fun. Zombies are fun. Zombie dragons are fun. You should play necromancers in everything you can. Thank you as always to my wonderful channel members. You are the necromancy to my necromancer, giving me dark and evil powers beyond mortal comprehension. If you'd like to support the channel, feel free to subscribe or become a member. Either way, thanks for watching and take care out there. The subtle foreshadowing of Nagash turning evil by virtue of having a name like Nagash must be studied. I mean, let's be honest here, there are some people with names that really should get them investigated a lot sooner than they were. Like, who looks at someone named Sheev Palpatine and goes, nah, that guy's just a politician, you don't gotta worry about it. Brother, that person is named Evil McEvil Lord, shoot them immediately.